The Democrat debate was last night. We are going to dive into just how crazy, how socialist, how left-wing things got today. Plus, the impeachment inquiry, or is it a probe, or is it a process? What the heck is going on with Pelosi and her gang of libs? That and more coming up on the Buck Sexton Show. Man, oh man, last night we had the opportunity to watch the Democrats do their thing on stage. And this is one of these days where part of me feels like I wish this was not the primary, the overwhelming news item, because this is going to be one of these days where it's a little troubling to think that this is the other political party in this country. Wow, it was some stuff last night, folks. I was watching and I thought to myself, this is basically the socialism Super Bowl. This is now out in the open, out there for everyone to see. The Democratic Party has embraced a European-style, not just social welfare state, but state control, central planning, that I think exceeds what you would see in most European countries. Perhaps all of them. I mean, the Green New Deal, as described by the libs, as described by Democrats, exceeds anything we have seen in European countries to date, today, I should say. I'm not saying it's more centrally planned than the Soviet Union, but I'm talking about present day. I also want to take a little bit of time today. I think it will help illustrate, when I say things like the libs, the Democrats are crazy. I know that can sound flippant, it can sound a little bit too sweeping, too broad. So what I think is helpful, given all that, is to look at how there are some Democrats who are substantially less crazy than others. And that was something that we certainly saw on display last night as well. Some Democrats had a good night, even if I think their plans are totally bonkers. Who did well, who did poorly, who's insane, who's somewhat normal? Those are some of the layers that we will get into today from the debate last night. But first and foremost, let's just understand that the Democrats now, as a function of the overall message of the party, not based in what any one individual says, the Democrats embrace a full-on government takeover of your health care. Sure, some are saying a Medicare for all plan versus a just Medicare option. Guess what? The Medicare option most likely will turn into a Medicare for all plan. And I'll get into why that is. But it's just, it's the difference really last night with all these different candidates between the continued incrementalism of the progressives. Oh, we're not going to go that far. Just do this thing for us. Just do this thing. Let the government take control of this aspect of your life and that aspect of your life. Versus those who say, like Elizabeth Warren, well, we should be in charge of everything. We don't want those rich Wall Street bankers to be making all the decisions for us. Let's let a panel of experts do it. Whew. People never learn. They never figure out that we have plenty of history on this. These experiments have all been tried. Does not work. It does not work. For those who point to Bernie Sanders, for example, and think, oh, but that's aspirational, what he's talking about. And wouldn't it be a good thing if we could get there? I say no. Because if we had what Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren and some of the others on that stage want us to as the guiding, not even principles, the guiding hand in our economy, which would just be the government, there would be innumerable deficiencies, not just in the market, but it would violate your freedom. That's a part of this that never, the tax component of this is something that's difficult for the Democrats to just get around. How are they going to pay for free health care for everybody, except for the rich people are going to pay for it, right? Free health care for everybody, free child care for everybody, free college for everybody, free. Well, there's going to be a lot of taxation to do that. And when we say taxation, what we really mean is adding debt to what is already seemingly an unsustainable debt load over the long term, but just add even more debt, more trillions and trillions with a T, putting it off onto future generations. And I know that this is not a happy moment, folks, but you know what the history of fiat currency is? It's very simple. It always goes to zero eventually. There's always a crash. There's always a dissolution of that currency when it is not backed by anything solid, when it is not pegged to anything that cannot just be fabricated out of thin air, goes to zero. We've run this experiment in the past. This is not a good thing for us. And yet here we are now with half the country believing the promises of the Democrats that this is only going to be on the backs of the rich. Meanwhile, the rich, if you look at taxation, we already have a very steep, progressive income tax. And yet the hope, I think, is that they'll make it even more so. Bernie Sanders is talking about an over 90% tax rate on certain levels of income. European countries have tried this. Didn't work out well. The millionaire's tax in France. We will take the millions from the very wealthy French people. And then Gérard Depardieu, this is true actually, very famously was like, I do not know if I can continue to be the most famous French thespian. I don't know why Gerard all of a sudden sounds like he's Pierre from Canada, but, you know, it's close enough. He has a more refined French accent, more like a Pierre. But he was going to flee and actually become a Russian citizen, I think. Because Russia has a flat tax now. I'm not saying we should emulate the Russians on taxation, but they do. I think they have a 10% flat tax or 15% flat tax, something like that. They got their own problems, though. People don't pay it. So they have a flat tax that a lot of rich people just don't pay. But last night was a lot of empty promises. And even scarier than the emptiness of the promises is the prospect of those promises being made real if they were able to follow through on it. Let's dig into some of this, shall we? And then I'll tell you the winners and losers, the usual horse race stuff when you talk about politics, the sportsification, if you will, of, who won, who lost, who's on the scoreboard. But we'll get into a little bit of that. And then I'll talk to you more about impeachment and just some other stories of note, the latest on Syria. But this will all also come up because the major topics last night were addressed, except for immigration, which I thought was so interesting. I can't even remember if there was really any specific. It was a long debate, very boring. It was like a high school chemistry lecture from hell. It's just whop, 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 whop. Nothing particularly interesting. Perhaps the most interesting moment was when Kamala Harris was trying to goad Elizabeth Warren into supporting banning Trump from Twitter, as if any serious person thinks that's going to happen. And Elizabeth Warren was like, not on my watch. Not today. But back to the issues here. I mean, it was nothing new particularly, and I think the avoidance of immigration as a topic was probably to the Democrats' benefit because they've just completely lost themselves on that issue. There are some parts, some aspects of the Democrat platform that are now truly described as, would accurately be described as extremist. On abortion, for example, Tulsi Gabbard, who, and I'm going to try to tone down my pro-Tulsiism today just because she's far and away my favorite Democrat. Now, that doesn't mean a whole heck of a lot, really, because I don't know if it was the worst Republican versus Tulsi Gabbard. It would be close. Would I vote for Tulsi Gabbard over Kasich for president? That's a tough question. Come back and ask me that one another day. But she's far and away my favorite. I'm going to try to temper that a little bit because I don't want to seem like I'm on Team Tulsi over here. Obviously, I think the Democrats are insane. I think their party has completely lost their minds. But on issues like abortion, immigration, they have fallen far out of anything that could be considered the mainstream. Forget about who's right and who's wrong, what the ethics are and all that for just a moment. The American people aren't with them on this stuff. They're not with them on open borders. They're not with them on third trimester abortion. And on some of these other areas, there was a clear incoherence. You had Mayor Pete, for example, with all these proclamations about how he wants us to get out of the Middle East, but not the way Trump is doing it. Okay, well, when are we ever really able to get out of the Middle East? When are we ever able to just pull the plug and say enough is enough? These are the questions the Democrats did not answer and need to answer. But let's dive into the biggest single policy agenda item, because it's the dream of democratic socialists and continues to be so and has been for over 100 years in this country. Just socialists, how about that? Health care that the government pays for and controls. Health care is a human right. Medicare for all, which is not even an accurate description of what it would be. Let's dive into that, my friends.
You have not specified how you're going to pay for the most expensive plan, Medicare for all. Will you raise taxes on the middle class to pay for it, yes or no?
So I have made clear what my principles are here, and that is costs will go up for the wealthy and for big corporations, and for hardworking middle-class families, costs will go down. The way I see this is I have been out all around this country. I've done 140 town halls now, been to 27 states and Puerto Rico. Should have done 70,000 selfies, which must be the new measure of democracy.
Senator Warren, to be clear, Senator Sanders acknowledges he's going to raise taxes on the middle class to pay for Medicare for all. You've endorsed his plan. Should you acknowledge it too?
So the way I see this, it is about what kinds of costs middle-class families are going to face. So let me be clear on this. Costs will go up for the wealthy, they will go up for big corporations, and for middle-class families, they will go down. I will not sign a bill into law that does not lower costs for middle-class families.
Your cost will go down. I will not sign a middle-class tax increase. Folks, numbers don't lie. You know how when you used to play sports in high school, I'm sure pretty much most, if not all of you did. I certainly did. And you wanted to really give a sick burn to the other side. You know, if you wanted to diss them. No one says diss anymore, by the way. What happened to that? It's a great contraction of disrespect. Yo, are you dissing me? No one says that. I think we should bring it back, Producer Mark. I think we could start to say that it's time to bring back the diss.
I diss you all the time. That's kind of my job.
But that's just a description of what you do, not what we describe it as.
All right, so we'll start describing it as dissing.
Diss, yeah. Ooh. And also people used to say, that's cold. Remember that? That was always fun.
Now that's just the temperature again.
Somebody would, yeah, exactly. Somebody would diss somebody else. You go, ooh, that's cold. All right. Well, Elizabeth Warren last night was talking about the healthcare system as though it's easy to just make all this stuff happen. You know, all you gotta do is just, I was waiting for her to tell some probably false story. My daddy always told me about growing up, if you got 2 roosters in the barn and you take 1 rooster, you got an apple pie. It's like, I'm pretty sure your dad didn't tell her that, but she likes to make stuff up. I'm just telling you, she likes to make stuff up. There's no way for her to do what she says she wants to do. And this is true of Bernie Sanders as well, who really is like a little throwback to the Soviet Union in so many ways. We'll get to him. But you can't have the program that she wants to have, even anything close to it, without raising taxes in the middle class. If you look at the tax burden in European countries, especially when you have the value-added tax, it's simply too high. Or simply higher, I should say, than what I think it's too high in general, but higher than what you have in this country right now. And on the middle class specifically, which really is just another way of saying people who are working and paying bills. I mean, the middle class is a very wide swath of American society. And so this is just where we get into Fantasyland stuff. And I will say, Mayor Pete Buttigieg, who I think somebody pointed out had only won, his last election was decided by less than 10,000. He received, I should say, less than 10,000 votes. I think it was 8,500. I don't know if that's true or not, but I saw it on the Twitter. So that's seems right, though, for South Bend, Indiana. How many people vote for mayor in South Bend, Indiana? But Mayor Pete saw an opening to go after Elizabeth Warren. She keeps saying things like costs will go down, but the middle class, costs will go down is a dishonest way of describing what's really going to happen here, which is you're going to have a massive increase in government taxation. Play clip 9, my good man.
Mayor Buttigieg, you say Senator Warren has been, quote, evasive about how she's going to pay for Medicare for all. What's your response?
Well, we heard it tonight, a yes or no question that didn't get a yes or no answer. Look, this is why people here in the Midwest are so frustrated with Washington in general and Capitol Hill in particular. Your signature, Senator, is to have a plan for everything, except this. No plan has been laid out to explain how a multi-trillion-dollar hole in this Medicare for All plan that Senator Warren is putting forward is supposed to get filled in. And the thing is, we really can deliver health care for every American and move forward with the boldest, biggest transformation since the inception of Medicare itself. But the way to do it without a giant multi-trillion-dollar hole and without having to avoid a yes or no question is Medicare for all who want it. We take a version of Medicare, we let you access it if you want to, and if you prefer to stay on your private plan, you can do that too. That is what most Americans want. Medicare for all who want it.
Medicare for all who want it would be very expensive too. Medicare is a good health care plan that people pay into over the course of their lives, and it is something you can only access, as you know, when you reach a certain age, when you reach 65. And guess what? If people can get all the benefits of Medicare when they're 25, guess what they're going to do? They're going to want to be on that Medicare plan. But this is where supply and demand, Econ 101, the basics of how a society functions, cause problems. They can cover everybody. I could, right now, I've got a plan. I have a plan to cover the entirety of America without raising taxes on the middle class. So that's the Elizabeth Warren way. I have a plan. We could just say that the government could just pass a law. Everybody now has health insurance. You know what that doesn't handle? Well, how good is the insurance? How quickly can they see a doctor? What are the copays? What do they do when doctors don't take that insurance because it doesn't pay them enough? What do they do when the government people that are actually the actuarial, well, there won't even be actuarials really because they'll just give everybody Medicare. But those who have to take out a spreadsheet and look at the costs of all this say, we can't afford this. Well, then you have rationing and you have shortages, which is what you've had in every country that's tried a similar approach to having the government run all of healthcare. Can we just be honest about what the costs would be and what the downside would be? No, Democrats can't be honest about it.
And I appreciate Elizabeth's work. But again, the difference between a plan and a pipe dream is something that you can actually get done. And we can get this public option done, and we can take on the pharmaceutical companies and bring down the prices. But what really bothers me about this discussion, which we've had so many times, is that we don't talk about the things that I'm hearing about from regular Americans. That is long-term care. We are seeing, I once called it a silver tsunami, the aging, and then someone told me that was too negative, so I call it the silver surge. The aging of the population. We need to make it easier to get long-term care insurance and strengthen Medicaid. In this state, the state of Ohio, that has been hit by the opioid epidemic, we need to take on those pharma companies and make them pay for the addictions that they have caused and the people that they have killed.
So that's Senator Klobuchar, and I got to tell you, I've made jokes on the show, and will continue to, about her being notoriously abusive to staff, which for a lady from the Midwest, wouldn't you always think she'd be like, oh gosh, I just made a bunch of cookies for everybody, and I just want to make sure you all got a good night's sleep. You know, I think she'd be really nice to her staff. Turns out the reports are that she was really nasty to her staff. But put that aside for a moment. She speaks about these issues sensibly. That doesn't mean correct. She's not correct necessarily in her diagnosis and what she would do about it, but she's dealing in some form of reality, which separates her out from these other Democratic candidates. So this is one of these moments where, yes, the Democrat debate last night was boring and crazy. But among the boring and crazy, Klobuchar, somebody who is dealing in reality. I disagree with some of her prescriptions. I disagree with some of her approach, to be sure. I certainly disagree with, and we'll get into all just the Trump hatred last night, which is a whole, really almost its own debate within the debate, just who could hate Trump the most. I wanted to start with the policy, though, because these are the things that are supposed to matter when you're talking about politics and politicians. But Klobuchar there discussing long-term care. Yeah, the big drivers of costs are long-term care for an aging population, pharmaceutical companies, which are certainly there's a component of that is legislation-based, and all the lobbyists running around, and that's a real thing. Hospitals, which have no price transparency and all kinds of incentives in place to extract as much as possible from you, especially if you go to a hospital and you're not poor and you don't have insurance, they just find every way they can to try to take everything in your bank account. It's absurd. If you're poor, it's just, they write it off. If you go to an emergency room, if you don't have any money, they just write it off. But if you have assets, they try to come after you for everything they can. These are the things that are driving, and end-of-life care, right? These are the things that are driving the costs up. So how do you deal with this? Well, one of the problems that the Democrats keep running into is the history of government providing services, and even more specifically, the history of our government being able to bring down the cost of something is very clear. They can't do it. The government doesn't. What has brought down the cost of let's say fossil fuels, of oil, gas in the tank? Is it government mandates and regulation, or is it fracking and increases in technology and efficiency from the private sector? Just one example. Now, some of you are probably saying, but Buck, there you go, the regulations. Yeah, I mean, the regulations can play some role in usually adding costs to it, but it's not making it cheaper. The only way they can make it cheaper is through direct subsidies, and subsidies are just redistribution of wealth, which are really just socialism. Right? There is corporate socialism that goes on in this country. There are people that are able to convince the Congress that certain businesses need money to be competitive, and there's a national or strategic advantage to that. But the price is what I'm trying to say. The market sets the price. Healthcare is an incredibly complicated system with a lot of practitioners, people that have to go to school, people that have their own bills to pay, doctors' offices that have staffs, and hospitals that have equipment, and all these things that go into this. And the government shows up and says, well, do this for all these people and charge this for all these services, and that's the way it's going to be. Well, the government can mandate that, but it still doesn't change what the price is. Price is the price, folks. This is the bane of the central planner's existence. It's true in healthcare. It's true in everything. Right? I know socialists, Democrats always get so upset when you bring up Venezuela, but look at Venezuela. Not just in its totality, but you look at what they tried to do with consumer goods. The moment that the economy really ran into trouble, largely because of the drop in oil prices, by the way, which our community in this country, or our industry in this country that brought about the fracking revolution and natural gas, the increase in natural gas production in particular in this country, has probably done more than any single initiative, foreign policy initiative or otherwise, to undermine some of the worst countries in the world, including Russia and Venezuela and Middle Eastern kleptocracies, by bringing those oil prices way, way down. That's been fantastic for geopolitics, for international stability and security. The bad guys, the real kleptocracies that rely on oil, that's been hard on them. But back to prices and price fixing in Venezuela. They said, okay, well, the consumers can't afford what people are trying to charge in stores for household goods, for different, products that you would buy, milk, toilet paper, whatever it may be. So what did the government do? The government says, okay, well, we're gonna decide what the price needs to be. Now that should work out for everybody. Right? The government says, well, if you charge this price, you're making enough money as the seller, and the consumer then can afford it. Well, the problem is the producer sets a price for the seller, the person that's actually making the stuff before it gets to the store, and that's the price. So you can keep squeezing at this and trying to manipulate it and doing all the, but it doesn't change the fundamental fact that healthcare is comprised of goods and services. And the government can mandate that everybody is covered and that everybody's going to have all this wonderful stuff, and it's all going to be, happy days, chocolate cupcakes, rainbows, and unicorns, but that's not what ends up happening. Sure, will there be some people that benefit? This is true of minimum wage, by the way. It's true of any number of policies. There are some people who will benefit from government intrusion in the marketplace. There'll be some people that, and these are the stories we'll hear. Oh my gosh, if it wasn't for my Obamacare plan, I would have been in a terrible spot with the disease that I have or whatever it may be. And it's good for that person. I understand that. But what about all the people who, because of the government intruding on the market, have to wait months before they can get a surgery? Perhaps they die waiting for the surgery. I mean, that doesn't get counted by the other side. Or people who have to go see a third-rate surgeon. You want to get scared? Forget about climate change. Oh, climate change is coming for us. This is for people that are having an existential crisis in their own lives. They just need something to latch onto. If you want to be scared about something that's real, look at how many people die from preventable infection in hospitals, essentially. It's bad stuff. You do not want to go to the practitioner matters. And anybody who's spent enough time around the medical system will tell you that, going to the doctor that's 100 miles away because that's the only one that your cut rate insurer will pay any component of the bill, that's not something you want to do. So what creates greater options? What creates greater efficiency? What rewards excellent care? The market. We do know, but this is fundamental. And I know that I'm getting into more of the philosophy now of healthcare, but Democrats they ignore all of this. You can cover as many people as you want. It doesn't mean that they're getting care. It doesn't mean they're getting good care. Medicaid, the biggest studies of Medicaid show that the health outcomes for people with Medicaid versus without it are effectively the same. Effectively the same. It doesn't really matter. We had a big study out of Oregon some years ago. It was the most comprehensive study they've ever done on Medicaid outcomes. So, and that's just healthcare welfare. That's just giving people free healthcare money or free healthcare. These things don't change. Doesn't matter how eloquent the speech that Mayor Pete or Warren or Kamala Harris Biden doesn't give eloquent speeches, but it doesn't matter what any of them say. These are the realities that we all deal with. And we have run this case study so many times. Think about the things in your life where price is allowed to determine, in general and overwhelmingly, the outcome. Consumer electronics, food. Should everyone starve to death? Why don't we give everyone free food? No. In fact, food now is better tasting, more variety. Food costs have gone up a little bit. We could talk about it, but that's a function of the inflation that we pretend doesn't really exist because of a whole bunch of ways that we calculate inflation in this country. But generally speaking, food is better, cheaper, and more available than any time in human history. That is fair to say. But do we need the government mandating that everybody has enough food to eat every day? No, because the market sets the price and people anyway. But we get into this basic economics argument with the left, and ultimately they view this. You see, socialism pretends to be scientific, but it's really an emotional and philosophical creed. Scientific socialism is actually what many of the earliest socialists used to call it, as though all the smart people who know things would agree with them. But the truth is that socialism is about what feels fair and feels right to people. Socialism is what drives the mentality that the price of bread should be about this because we say so, because that seems right. Doesn't matter what is true. It matters what feels good. Same is true with our healthcare system. I think our healthcare system needs overhaul in a whole bunch of areas. We need to deal with prescription drug pricing. We need price transparency. That's the single biggest thing. We need that across the healthcare system. What does this thing cost? Not let's hide the costs and then try to, lard other things into the procedure and get some from the government and get some from the healthcare company and get some from the consumer and all these games that are played. It just turns into this big black box and nobody can see what's inside. Enough of that. But unfortunately, they're going to tell us. Look, and Klobuchar recognized this in the debate. She's like, what Warren's talking about, it's just fantasy stuff. It doesn't work. It's not going to happen. What Bernie Sanders is discussing, eliminating private health insurance, does anyone understand how expensive that would be? And then there's also let's be honest, there's a moral and philosophical argument of, so I just need to pay for, everybody else, no matter what they do, no matter what life choices they make, we all get the same health care now. And in fact, my earnings have to go to paying for other people's health care. I mean, I could be somebody who's very healthy, very conscientious, but if somebody else wants to, drink a fifth of Jim Beam before going skydiving 5 days a week while, smoking, a cigarette, vaping or whatever, and eating, 8 pounds of fried food a day, that cannot be factored into any of this. It's everyone gets the same. What does that start to sound like, by the way? What polity, what political entity? Everyone gets the same. Oh, that's right. The Soviet Union, where Bernie Sanders spent his honeymoon. I don't think Bernie's changed, folks. Just because he's from the Ben and Jerry's state, where everyone up in Vermont seems pretty cool and chill, and I love Vermont. It's a fun place. Doesn't mean that Bernie's not a socialist. He's a socialist, a real socialist, with the full-on socialism plan. We got more.
Just to clarify, Vice President, who are you saying is being vague?
Well, the senator said she's being vague on the issue of, actually both of them being vague on the issue of the Medicare for all. No, look, here's the deal. Come on. It costs $30 trillion. Guess what? That's over $3 trillion a year. It's part of the entire federal budget.
Where am I? I mean, Biden is. Look, we're going to tie this all into impeachment and the shrill lunacy of Democrats. That'll be coming up in a moment here, because that all matters. But on this issue of first of all, Biden last night at the debate, that's your front runner? That guy barely showed up. It felt like he wasn't even really there. Biden is the great standard bearer of the Democratic Party. We're supposed to think that this guy is going to be able to, as he says, beat Trump like a drum, or beat him like a drum. He loves that beat him like a drum thing. He repeats it all the time. It's like saying, he every time he says it, at least for me, he's engaging in a little bit of self-referential aging himself. It's like, I'm going to beat him like a drum. Anyway, Biden stammered through that answer. It's clearly, okay, it's going to be really expensive, fine, but tell us why, and tell us what you do that's different. That's the part of it where it all falls down. Biden is not a policy guy. Biden's really a Biden guy. It's just all about showing up, smiling, sounding like you care about things that are going to be popular enough to keep you in office. That's really it. There's nothing about Joe Biden that's inspiring, that's compelling. In fact, I think most Democrats would agree the single most inspiring thing about Joe Biden is that he happened to be vice president for 8 years while Barack Obama was president. That's really what he's holding on to at this point. But he even said something, I mean, this was getting a lot of attention on social, because last night, as I was watching this thing, people were like, what the heck is he talking about? Clipping coupons at the what? Producer Mark, would you please bring us back into this gem of a debate moment? Play clip 6.
No, look, demonizing wealth people. What I talked about is how you get things done. And the way to get things done is take a look at the tax code right now. The idea, we have to start rewarding work, not just wealth. I would eliminate the capital gains tax. I would raise the capital gains tax to the highest rate of 39.5%. I would double it. Because guess what? Why in God's name should someone who's clipping coupons in the stock market pay a lower tax rate than someone who, in fact, is, like I said, a school teacher and a firefighter? It's ridiculous, and they pay a lower tax. Secondly, the idea that we, in fact, engage in this notion that there's $1.64 trillion in tax loopholes. You can't justify a minimum $600 billion of that. We could eliminate it all. I could go into detail had I the time. Secondly, thirdly, what we need to do is we need to go out and make it clear to the American people that we are going to raise taxes on the wealthy. We're going to reduce tax burdens on those who are not. And this is one of the reasons why these debates are kind of crazy, because everybody tries to squeeze everything into every answer that is given. The fact is, everybody's right about the fact that the fourth industrial revolution is costing jobs. It is. The fact is also corporate greed. If they're going back and not investing in their employees, they're reinvesting and buying back their stock.
I love how he says everyone else tries to squeeze everything into an answer. I was waiting for him to tell us about the origins of the universe there.